Professor Antti Raunio comes from the University of Helsinki and will move us to consider our neighbor.
So, thank you for the kind invitation. I hope you hear well. Is it okay? Fine. So my topic is searching for the neighbor's good, Luther's social theology in the contemporary world. But I'm not going to deal very much with concrete contemporary social problems, but mostly with the question how to understand or how to evaluate what actually is good and how can we find that which is good for the neighbor. I think this is also a fundamental social question, and perhaps Luther has something to say about this problem. When we ask of the social impact or contribution of Luther and Lutheranism, we may get two quite different answers. The first answer points out the so-called negative understanding of a human being as a sinner, and the nature of the political order or political community as coercive power which prevents people from harming each other. According to this view, Lutheran theology doesn't give the political community any, or at least not very much, positive social tasks. The social care belongs more to the responsibility of individuals or different organizations, for example, churches and religious communities. Reformation can thus be seen as a forerunner of the so-called liberal night guard state. This view has been presented quite recently, for example, by the well-known Catholic moral theologian Charles E. Curran in his book concerning the Roman Catholic social teaching. However, the Lutheran social impact can be seen also in a very different light. Then, the Lutheran social reformation seems to have at least starting points for many ideas which have later been developed to European models of welfare state, either to the so-called Nordic welfare model or to the Middle European social liberalism. The word social is here important. In this view, the Lutheran theology accentuates the social responsibilities of the political community. For example, John Witte Jr. has argued for this view in his recent study concerning Reformation and law. It is somehow astonishing that two very different social models or ways of thinking about social reality have been seen as results of the Lutheran Reformation or its theological principles. One possible reason for this is, however, that Luther's theology contains the both aspects, but as often in Luther's case, his interpreters have taken only one side or one aspect of his many-dimensional thinking. I am not maintaining that now you will hear the whole truth. Also, this presentation will very likely be one-sided from some point of view. Luther assesses very much the worldly authorities' task to take care of justice. And for him, maintaining justice presupposes also use of coercive power. Justice contains good laws and obedience to them. At the same time, justice is one presupposition of a society where everyone can have what she or he needs for living. Luther speaks very often about people's needs which have to be fulfilled. And with his colleagues, he tried to develop a social community where this could be possible. For this purpose, the Reformation cities grounded the common chests and renewed education system, poor relief, and partly also healthcare. The idea was that the community is together responsible for the basic needs of its members. And everyone should have the basic needs for his or her living, regardless of how much one can self-contribute to the common good of the society. It should not be dependent of your social status, for example. These should be open to all, these basic needs. The common chests were one practical application of the idea that all members of a community are serving each other, which was one of the ideas which we discussed yesterday concerning his writing on the German Nobel. What is the connective factor between the negative role of coercive justice and the positive tasks of taking care of education, basic income and healthcare and some other social tasks? For Luther, it is surely the seeking of the neighbor's good. In other words, it's the divine love which is the source, the creator and donator of everything good. And now we come to the question how Luther understands the searching of the neighbor's good in the community. One central question concerning the searching for good is the relation between the social responsibility of the public institutions, individual citizens, and the church. In the contemporary world, we have different ways of evaluating the basic good of the members of a society. There is actually a very large discussion concerning the basic goods, and I cannot deal with the whole discussion. I present only 3 alternatives, which I think are quite fundamental. 2 of these alternatives have a strong common feature, since they both consider the activity and responsibility of a human individual person as the basic good. It's best or good for for a person to be responsible for his own destiny and to act actively in order to make him or herself more able to reach his or her aim. The first view presupposes that all human beings have a common end, and every individual is personally responsible of reaching this end. The main purpose of a human being is to actualize his or her human nature and develop it as perfect as possible. The second alternative is to understand the human nature and its aims as individual. This means that there isn't any common human nature and not any common end, but they are private and differ from each other. And this second alternative is the understanding of the modern liberal democracies. The first alternative implies that by knowing the human nature, one becomes able to say what is good for the development and perfection of all human beings. For example, the political authorities may know how a human person reaches best his or her natural and social goals, and the Church has the mandate to define how to reach the supernatural and eternal goal. However, the responsibility for reaching the goals belongs at first hand to the human person, him or herself. To promote a person's good is to support her possibilities to reach the natural and supernatural goals. Essential is that human beings have a given end and personal freedom to seek it. Good is then everything which strengthens the personal searching of this end. A good society supports one's efforts in reaching the human perfection, but bewares of taking too much responsibility which belongs to the individual persons. The second alternative leads to the consequence that in most cases a human person knows and chooses herself what is good for her. She knows best her own aims and preferences. Some of her nearest people may also be able to understand what is good for her, but most people don't. Not to speak about the public institutions. So, an ideal society leaves it free for the decision of individual persons to decide what is good for them and doesn't try to intervene in things which are out of its capacities. This view stresses the so-called negative aspect of a person's freedom because people aren't bound to any given ends. And then the third conception of a social good begins with the basic needs of a human person. Then these needs aren't only material, but also intellectual and spiritual. According to this view, a good society is able to provide and guarantee such circumstances where all members of the society have access to these basic goods. The question is then, to what degree a human person is herself responsible for getting her basic needs, and how much it is on the responsibility of the community or society. So far, I have tried to describe three different ways of understanding the basic good of a human person in a social context. I want to stress that the difference concerns the basic good, not inevitably the secondary goods. One may ask if the basic needs are the presuppositions of the personal freedom, or does the person need the largest possible freedom in order to achieve what she needs? I think that this principally very simple question is fundamental in the discussion concerning the social structures in the globalizing world. You can say that the first alternative is classical, based on Aristotelian thinking, and mostly represented nowadays in the contemporary world by the Roman Catholic social teaching. The second alternative which I described is more the view of the liberal democratic way of thinking, and the third way is then third alternative is more or less characteristic to the welfare idea of a society. What would Luther then say about the social good of human beings? One of Luther's well-known theological ideas is that the faith frees the human beings to serve the neighbor in love. Faith frees the human beings to serve the neighbor in love. And Luther defines the love of neighbor as searching for the good of others, not of one's own. And Professor Dieter actually described just some of the reasons why Luther thought in this way. Luther repeats often that love of neighbor only aims to fulfill the neighbor's need. But how the neighbor's good can be recognized? Is it possible? Luther distinguishes between temporary, worldly good and eternal and spiritual good. They aren't, however, totally separated, even though they are different things. In order to understand the nature of the temporal goods, we need also spiritual goods, above all the knowledge of God, His goodness and love. God is good, He is the goodness itself, says Luther. However, goodness isn't the fundamental quality of God. God's goodness, namely the good works which He is doing, flows from His love. Goodness can be understood only in connection with the divine self-giving love. Luther's discussion concerning the object of divine love is well known. Professor Dieter referred to this also. For him, God's love doesn't seek good objects in order to love them, but creates the goodness of its object. Actually, this means that all created things are God's good creatures. Luther says this, for example, by stressing that God gives Himself with all His creatures. By creating the things, God also gives them their existence and life and accepts them. The Father speaks them into being, they receive their existence through the Son, and the Holy Spirit sees and accepts them. The acceptance or acceptation and seeing the creation's goodness means that the triune God loves and maintains His creation, says Luther. God's love also creates the good things and in addition accepts and maintains their goodness. Consequently, the divine love is not only the love which gives the goodness. Its other aspect is the acceptance of the given goodness. Love as creating the goodness and love as acceptance of a good object are two aspects of the same divine love. And I think this is a little different aspect from the traditional understanding, for example, from Anders Nygren, that the divine love is only this giving love, which in a sense creates its object, but doesn't seek the good what is in the object. But actually Luther's understanding of divine love contains both aspects, the love which gives the goodness and the love which accepts and in this sense loves the given goodness. And I think this has also meaning for his social thinking. In the Large Catechism, Luther summarizes the whole creed by stating that it tells what triune God does for human beings and donates to them. The Father gives the life and maintains it all the time. He also gives the whole creation to fulfill the needs of our life. Moreover, he stresses that God hasn't only given all things needed for life, but he also protects and guards them from all evil. In other words, he maintains the goodness of these created gifts. Because Luther includes the maintaining of things in God's seeing and acceptation, we have here the two aspects of divine love, namely giving and accepting. The divine love and goodness has also social consequences. All creatures are meant to be in service of others, and this service is based on actualizing the divine love. This means that the creatures use themselves and other creatures in order to fulfill the basic needs of life. In actualizing his love, God uses both the worldly and the spiritual government. The worldly government is there to continue the divine giving of external goods and protecting them from all evil which try to destroy life. The spiritual government is there to continue the giving of the eternal and spiritual goods through the word and the sacraments. Luther's idea of social renewal is based on his understanding of the divine love and goodness. God's good works are meant to give and support life. God's creatures are at the same time such good works, and they serve each other in need. This was the starting point when Luther suggested the Reformation cities to establish the common chests and collect money in order to renew the poor relief and other social systems. In evaluating what is the real good and need of the neighbor, it is important to take Luther's distinction between love and good works into consideration. Luther stresses that the divine law is the law of love. It is the law of love in the spirit which should govern all the external laws in the world. Luther makes also here a distinction between the law in the spirit and the external worldly laws. The law of the spirit refers to the demand of love, and the external laws refer to the different concrete good acts and deeds. Luther continues by saying that all laws, this means the external laws, should be given, ordered, and kept in order to practice love. The real aim of all laws is love, not certain precepts or deeds in themselves. Love realizes itself when the need of one's neighbor is fulfilled. If the work is not helpful for the neighbor, it should be left undone. As an example of the practice of love in using the external laws, Luther gives the right way to feed and clothe one's neighbor. One should not look at the food and clothes, but the need and good of the other. One should stop giving when he sees that the other doesn't need or can't receive anymore. The point is that even though the works are good in themselves, only love makes them good for a certain person in a definite situation. Practicing love means therefore learning to understand what is the real need and good of one's neighbor. And that cannot be defined beforehand. It has to be find out in the concrete situation. Luther describes the content and actualizing of love when he explains the commandment of love and the so-called golden rule. For Luther, the golden rule is simultaneously the commandment of love and the first principle of practical reason. He thinks that the Spirit is actually all the time writing it in the hearts of human beings. Even though the commandment of love shines in the human reason, as Luther says, all people don't still acknowledge it. Even though the Spirit is writing the commandment of love or the golden rule in the human heart, still all people doesn't understand it. This means that the practical reason of a human being is all the time dependent on God's active work, even in the sinful state of a human being where he does not actually really understand what the law says and means. Still, the human beings may understand something of the law, namely outward good works. In Luther's understanding, on the level of practical reason, it is possible for all human beings to find out the good works or good deeds. However, the reason doesn't by itself grasp the content and demand of love. This ignorance is due to the inability to recognize and receive divine love and goodness. This means that in order to understand the content of love, they should receive both God Himself and His acceptance or grace. But this can happen only by faith. Firstly, the commandment of love or the golden rule shows how much a human person loves herself. Everyone waits love, acceptance, and good works from other people. aren't they waiting? The commandment of love puts one's own heart as an example for how one should love his or her neighbor. The self-love is presupposed but not commanded, for Luther. The only aim of love is to seek and promote the neighbor's good. In seeking the other's good or advantage, one may apply the golden rule. According to Luther, its idea is to put oneself in the other's position and ask what one would need if he were the other or if he were in the similar situation. The point is not always to do what the other wills exactly at that moment, but to try to understand what he really needs. This is exactly Luther's idea of the actualization of love. Love means concrete fulfilling of the neighbor's need, even though one can, with reason, know good works, he or she doesn't know beforehand what is best for the other. Luther doesn't consider the common human nature as a criterion of the neighbor's good. On the other hand, neither the preferences of an individual decide, at least in all cases, what is good for the neighbor. Luther is also neither classical Aristotelian nor modern liberal in this respect. His idea seems to be that good for the neighbor is primarily that he or she may be a member of a community where all serve each other. In order to get this good, he or she has to be served by the community with both temporal and eternal goods. Does such community of mutual serving exist? I think Luther was very aware of the fact that it hardly exists, but for him, and he was sometimes very disappointed with this fact, but for him it was essential to believe that it is possible and has to be actualized all the time. This would perhaps be the Lutheran social activity even in the contemporary world. Thank you.